There is a clock inside your body, not a metaphor, a literal biological clock, built into every cell, running continuously, governing when your body burns fat, when it repairs tissue, when it is most sensitive to insulin, when it produces hormones, when it clears cellular waste, and when it is most vulnerable to the damage caused by elevated blood sugar. This clock does not care what time your watch says. It cares about one thing: how long since you last ate. And there is a specific number, a threshold built into human biology that, when crossed consistently, changes almost everything about how your metabolism functions. That number is 12 hours. Today, I want to talk about what I call the 12-hour rule. What happens in your body when you go 12 hours between your last meal of the day and your first meal of the next day? Why most people in the modern world never reach this threshold, and what that failure is costing them metabolically, and how applying this single timing principle, without changing what you eat, without counting calories, without any new supplement, can meaningfully improve your fasting glucose, your insulin sensitivity, your liver health, and your energy. This is not about fasting as a trend. This is not about extreme protocols or skipping meals or suffering through hunger. This is about understanding the biological timing built into your body and simply not fighting against it. Let me start with the science, because this is one of the areas where the research is genuinely fascinating, and once you understand it, the 12-hour rule will feel less like a rule and more like a natural consequence of how the body works. Your body operates on a rhythm called the circadian clock. Circadian comes from the Latin words for approximately and day. It refers to the roughly 24-hour cycle that governs biological processes in virtually every living organism on Earth, from single-celled bacteria to human beings. Your circadian clock is set primarily by two signals: light and food. Light tells your brain what time of day it is. Food tells your body whether it is in a fed state or a fasted state. And these two signals coordinate an enormous number of physiological processes that occur at specific times within the 24-hour cycle. Here's what happens in the fed state, the hours after eating. When food is consumed, glucose enters the bloodstream. Insulin is released. The body shifts into what scientists call an anabolic state: building, storing, absorbing. The liver absorbs glucose and stores it as glycogen. Fat tissue absorbs triglycerides. Cells are growing and replicating. Inflammation tends to be slightly elevated because digestion and absorption are metabolically active processes. This is all normal and necessary. The fed state is essential. You need to absorb nutrients. You need to store energy. But here's what most people do not know. The fed state is not the only state the body needs to thrive. And it is not the state in which most repair, metabolic optimization, and hormonal regulation occur. That happens in the fasted state. Beginning approximately 4 to 6 hours after the last meal, as glucose from that meal is fully absorbed and blood sugar returns toward baseline, the body begins transitioning into the fast state. Insulin levels fall. The liver shifts from glucose storage to glucose production. Stored fat begins to be mobilized as a fuel source, and a process called autophagy begins to activate. Autophagy is one of the most important biological processes you have probably never heard of. The word means self-eating. It is the cellular maintenance system, the mechanism by which your cells identify and break down old, damaged, or dysfunctional proteins and organelles, recycle the components, and use them to build new, healthy cellular machinery. Think of it as your cell's internal cleaning and renovation service. During the fed state, this service is largely paused because the cells are occupied with processing incoming nutrients. During the fasted state, as insulin falls and the fuel environment becomes quieter, autophagy turns on and the internal maintenance work begins. This process is essential for metabolic health. Dysfunctional mitochondria, the energy-producing structures inside cells, are cleared and replaced. Damaged proteins that can accumulate and cause cellular dysfunction are processed. Inflammatory debris is removed, and it requires time in the fasted state to occur meaningfully. Research, including work that earned the 2016 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine awarded to Dr. Yoshinori Osumi for his discoveries in autophagy mechanisms, has shown that this cellular maintenance process intensifies significantly after approximately 12 hours of fasting. 12 hours, not 36 hours, not 24, 12. A window that is achievable by almost everyone, almost every day, without dramatic lifestyle disruption. Now let me connect this directly to blood sugar and insulin resistance. Here's what 12 hours in the fasted state does specifically for glucose metabolism. First, it allows insulin to fall to baseline. Every time you eat particular carbohydrates, insulin is released. As long as insulin is elevated, the body cannot effectively access stored fat as fuel. The liver remains in storage mode rather than production mode. and certain inflammatory processes that are suppressed by insulin remain active. Most people eating their last meal at 9 or 10 p.m. and their first meal at 7 or 8 a.m. are compressing their overnight fast to 9 or 10 hours. Insulin from the late evening meal has not fully returned to baseline when the next day's food begins arriving. The body never fully enters the deep fasted state. 12 hours of consistent overnight fasting allows insulin to fall fully. The liver has time to shift modes completely. The body has time to mobilize stored fat. And the metabolic processes that require low insulin to function, including autophagy, hormonal recalibration, and liver glycogen regulation, have adequate time to operate. Second, 12 hours of overnight fasting reduces what is called the glucose area under the curve. This is a measure of how much time your blood sugar spends elevated across a 24-hour period. Research using continuous glucose monitors has shown consistently that people who eat within a compressed window and then fast for 12 or more hours have lower total daily glucose exposure than people who eat the same foods across a longer window. Total daily glucose exposure is one of the most important predictors of long-term metabolic health. Every additional hour that blood sugar is elevated, even mildly elevated, contributes to the cumulative damage of glycation, which is the process by which glucose molecules bind to proteins and impair their function. Glycation of blood vessel walls, nerve tissue, kidney cells, and lens proteins in the eye is the mechanism behind many of the long-term complications of diabetes. Reducing total daily glucose exposure by consistently fasting 12 hours overnight is a direct strategy for reducing glycation damage. Third, 12 hours of fasting allows the liver to complete its overnight glucose production cycle without the interference of another incoming meal. We have discussed the liver's overnight glucose output extensively in this series. The liver releases stored glucose during the night to fuel the brain and body during the fasting period. In people with insulin resistance, this output is excessive, one of the primary drivers of high fasting glucose. When the overnight fast is shortened, when dinner is late and breakfast is early, the liver does not complete its natural overnight regulation cycle. It is interrupted by incoming food before it has had time to recalibrate. And research suggests that this incomplete cycle contributes to the dysregulation of overnight glucose production that causes high fasting numbers. A consistent 12-hour overnight window allows the liver to complete the cycle, to recalibrate, to arrive at breakfast in a more regulated state. Now let me address the most important practical question. How do you actually achieve 12 hours consistently without it becoming complicated or uncomfortable? The answer is simpler than most people expect, and it requires no extreme measures. The 12-hour rule has two components. The time you stop eating in the evening and the time you start eating in the morning. Everything in between is the window. Everything in between is the window. If you stop eating at 7 p.m. and eat breakfast at 7 a.m., you have completed 12 hours. If you stop eating at 8 p.m. and eat breakfast at 8 a.m., you have completed 12 hours. If you stop eating at 6 p.m. and eat breakfast at 7 a.m., you have completed 13 hours. The specific times do not matter. The gap matters. For most people, the adjustment that needs to happen is on the evening side, not the morning side. Because breakfast timing is often constrained by work, family, and routine, but dinner timing has more flexibility. Moving the last meal earlier, from 9 p.m. to 7 p.m., from 8 p.m. to 6:30 p.m., is the primary lever for most people. And this connects directly to what we discussed in the evening sugar spike video and the fasting numbers protocol video. Eating dinner earlier is not just about giving food time to digest before bed. It is about ensuring that the 12-hour biological threshold is crossed before you eat again. There are a few additional guidelines that make the 12-hour rule more effective and more sustainable. The first is what counts as breaking the fast. Water does not break the fast. Plain black coffee or plain tea without sugar or milk does not meaningfully break the fast for most purposes. These do not raise insulin significantly and do not interrupt the fasting state. Anything containing calories, even small amounts of cream in coffee, a small piece of fruit, a glass of milk, raises insulin and signals the body to shift back into the fed state. If you drink coffee in the morning before breakfast, keeping it black allows you to extend the fasting window without disrupting your morning routine. The second guideline is consistency over perfection. The 12-hour rule is most effective when applied consistently across most nights of the week. Not every night perfectly, but most nights regularly. The metabolic benefits of consistent overnight fasting accumulate over weeks and months. A single night of achieving 12 hours does nothing. 7 nights a week for 12 weeks does something real. On the nights when dinner is unavoidably late, family occasions, travel, social events, apply the rule as best you can and move forward without guilt. One disrupted night in a week of consistent practice does not undo the week. The third guideline addresses what to do if you feel hungry before the 12 hours are complete. True hunger in the fasted state is often not as powerful as expected, particularly once the body has adapted to the pattern over 2 to 3 weeks. The body becomes more efficient at accessing stored fat as fuel, and this reduces the urgency of the hunger signal. But if hunger is genuinely disruptive in the first week or two of establishing this pattern, there are two approaches. The first is to ensure that your last meal of the day is genuinely satisfying, rich in protein, fat, and fiber so that it sustains you through the night comfortably. A dinner that leaves you feeling unsatisfied is a dinner that will drive late-night eating and shorten the fasting window. The second is to start with a smaller gap and build gradually. If you are currently fasting 9 or 10 hours overnight, add 30 minutes per week until you reach 12. The body adapts, the hunger signals recalibrate, and the process becomes natural rather than effortful within 3 to 4 weeks. Let me tell you about Margaret. You may remember Margaret from the evening sugar spike video and again from the anti-inflammatory fats discussion. 71 years old, very organized, she had made significant progress with her evening routine and her food choices over the months we worked together. But there was one pattern that persisted. Her morning fasting glucose, while better than it had been, was still inconsistent. Some mornings were good, 108, 112. Some mornings were still elevated, 128, 135. And she could not identify a clear pattern related to what she had eaten. When I looked more carefully at her evening log, the variable that correlated most strongly with her morning numbers was not the composition of dinner, it was the timing. On evenings when she finished eating by 6:30 or 7 p.m., which happened naturally several days per week, her morning numbers were consistently in the 105 to 115 range. On evenings when dinner was later, 8 p.m. or 8:30, which happened when her daughter visited or when she was tired and cooked later than usual, her morning numbers were consistently in the 125 to 135 range. Same foods, same medication, same evening walk, different timing. The difference was whether she crossed the 12-hour threshold before eating breakfast. When dinner was at 6:30 and breakfast was at 7 o'clock, she was at 12.5 hours. When dinner was at 8:30 and breakfast was at 7 o'clock, she was at 10.5 hours. Not quite through the threshold. Insulin from the late dinner had not fully returned to baseline before the next morning's food began arriving. We made one targeted change. We established a firm kitchen close time of 7 p.m. on most evenings. After 7 p.m., only water, plain herbal tea, or black coffee. She was skeptical about how meaningful 2 hours could be. 6 weeks later, her morning glucose log showed an average fasting reading of 109. Across 6 weeks, down from a previous average that had been closer to 121. 12 points from timing alone. She sat across from me and said, "I changed nothing about what I eat, I just changed when I stop." That is the 12-hour rule. That is the power of working with the body's biological clock instead of unconsciously working against it. Now let me also speak briefly about the people for whom the 12-hour rule needs to be approached with extra care. If you are on insulin or certain glucose-lowering medications that can cause hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, please discuss any change to your eating window with your doctor before implementing it. As your overnight fasting extends and your blood sugar management improves, your medication may need adjustment. We have discussed this in multiple videos throughout this series. Better metabolic management is a wonderful outcome, but it must be monitored when medication is involved. Your doctor needs to know what you are doing so they can help you do it safely. If you have a history of eating disorders, structured eating windows should only be approached under the guidance of your healthcare team. If you experience dizziness, shakiness, confusion, or sweating during the fasting window, symptoms that could indicate hypoglycemia, break the fast, consume something with glucose, and contact your doctor. For the vast majority of people, 12 hours of overnight fasting is safe, natural, and beneficial. It is in fact closer to what human biology evolved to expect than the modern pattern of eating across 16 or more hours of the day. But individual circumstances matter, and your doctor is your partner in navigating yours. Let me bring the 12-hour rule together with everything else we have discussed in this series, because this is where the pieces connect. You have learned about the importance of breakfast composition, and the 12-hour rule ensures that when you eat breakfast, your body is arriving from a genuine fasted state, primed to respond appropriately to the first meal of the day. You have learned about the evening sugar spike and the liver's overnight glucose output, and the 12-hour rule gives the liver the time it needs to complete its overnight regulation cycle before the next meal arrives. You have learned about the second meal effect and how lunch shapes dinner's glucose response, and the 12-hour rule ensures that each new day begins from a regulated metabolic baseline rather than a carryover of the previous day's elevated insulin state. You have learned about post-meal walking, anti-inflammatory fats, protein distribution, spice additions, fermentable fiber at lunch, and the plate method. All of these are strategies that operate within your eating window, shaping what happens when you are in the fed state. The 12-hour rule governs what happens when you are not eating. And the two, what you eat and when you stop, are partners. Neither is complete without the other. A perfectly composed meal within a 10-hour eating window that runs from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. will still produce worse overnight outcomes than the same meal within a 12-hour window ending at 7 p.m. And a 12-hour fasting window with poor food choices during the eating window will produce limited improvement. The quality of what you eat and the timing of when you stop eating work together synergistically to produce metabolic outcomes that neither achieves fully alone. Your body has a clock. It has rhythms. It has biological expectations built over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, expectations that include both a fed period and a meaningful fasted period each day. The modern world has disrupted those rhythms in ways our biology was not designed for. Late night eating, early morning eating, constant snacking, screens that blur the transition between day and night, all of these compress the fasting window and deprive the body of the time it needs to repair, recalibrate, and regulate. The 12-hour rule is not a diet. It is a return to rhythm. Stop eating at 7 p.m., begin eating at 7 a.m. 12 hours, consistently. Let the clock run. And watch what happens to your numbers. Before I close, the familiar reminder that I give because it always matters. If you are on diabetes medication, blood pressure medication, or any prescription that affects glucose or fluid balance, please tell your doctor that you are establishing a 12-hour overnight eating window. As your metabolic health improves, your medication needs may change. That recalibration belongs with your physician. And if you know someone whose blood sugar numbers fluctuate without obvious explanation, someone who is careful about food but still waking up to disappointing readings, please share this video with them. The timing of the last meal of the day may be the missing variable they have never considered. Next week, we are going to bring this entire series to its culmination with the topic we have referenced in almost every single video: sleep. The connection between sleep and blood sugar. Why poor sleep is one of the most powerful drivers of insulin resistance, and what you can begin doing tonight to start sleeping in a way that protects your metabolic health. It ties everything together. Do not miss it. Subscribe, hit the bell. I will see you next week. I am Dr. Sterling. Take care of yourself. Tonight, close the kitchen at 7. Your metabolism will notice.